Well, good morning. It's fantastic to see you all here. Welcome to this session on the 5th International Polar Year, 2032-33. If you are new to the International Polar Year, you're going to get a lot of information from this session. I hope it's going to be really useful for you. If you've heard me and other people speak from this stage before, then you will hear some things that you already know, but also I think we will find some new pieces of information for you. We have a fantastic panel to share information about the International Polar Year. But we're not going to speak for the whole time. It's much more important in many ways that we hear from you, your questions and your comments. So we will make sure we have time right at the end for that. We want to have a dialogue with you. The International Polar Year, if it is anything, it is about a dialogue between scientists and knowledge holders and the people here in the audience and beyond who will make the International Polar Year just as successful as all the previous ones have been. So thank you very much for being here. We have 4 representatives from 4 organizations who have been a key part of the planning and will be part of the delivery of the International Polar Year. We have UN agencies, we have the International Science Council, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research. So that's 4 really, really important organizations, and they have a fantastic track record of being involved in the International Polar Years, and will do with this one. But there are only 4 of 35 or more international organizations that have been deeply involved over the last few years in planning the International Polar Year. So the things you will hear today are important and part of the picture, but there is a much broader organization kind of behind this as well. And there is still space for international, regional organizations to be part of the planning process. Everything I've heard at the Arctic Circle Assembly this year and in previous years, every time I open a newspaper, every time I look online, makes me realize that the International Polar Year is needed now more than ever before. The threats that we know about in the Arctic and the Antarctic, the opportunities that we know about in both places, mean that the International Polar Year is just right in terms of its timing, but the importance is absolutely preeminent. We've made a step change, I think, in the last 12 years in terms of planning for the International Polar Year. So we have a stand outside, and you will see information there about how national countries will involve themselves in the International Polar Year. There's a whole new process for building up national involvement in the International Polar Year. There's a whole process for now having an international coordination office for the International Polar Year, and that will mean we can further scale up our planning and our delivery for the Polar Year. And we're also thinking hard, and we'll be making new announcements very early in the new year about the endorsement process for the IPY, because the IPY will be successful when we have projects and programs nationally and particularly internationally that take the IPY logo, that subscribe to the values and the principles and make it live. And so that endorsement process, how you can get involved through your projects and programs, your initiatives, will come online very soon. So please do find out about all of those. We have a session this afternoon at 5 to 4 on the 4th floor where you can find out more about the detail of all of that. Please do come along. The thing that is special about the International Polar Year is that it's about new international partnerships. It's about making a significant step change, a once-in-a-generation impact in what we know and understand about the polar regions. So for this International Polar Year, we're thinking about what new observations we can make, what new monitoring we can do, how we can fill holes, gaps in our knowledge about the Arctic and the Antarctic. We're thinking about new tools and new methods, how we can share infrastructure, how we can develop new technological advances that help us to monitor and know more about these regions. And we're thinking how we can advance transdisciplinary research, so how we can connect between the different disciplines. Social science was an enormous part of the last IPY, IPY4, and it will have a huge role here as well, as will indigenous knowledge and other knowledge systems. But the true test of the International Polar Year is what a difference it will make for societies, the people of the Arctic, the people who work in the Antarctic, but the global population as a whole. It's the societal impact and benefits from the International Polar Year that will really make it come alive, and particularly how we can use the better knowledge that we get to inform better decisions about the Arctic and the Antarctic. And this Polar Year is focused on the Arctic and the Antarctic, as it has been in the past. But we are very conscious about the global connections between both of those regions and the rest of the world. The track record of the IPY is that it makes those connections, and I think that will be particularly the case with this fifth one in 32-33. So we're working alongside the UN decades for oceans and cryospheric sciences and many other UN decades to make sure we are connecting so that the whole globe is covered through the International Polar Year, but with a focus on the Arctic and the Antarctic. So we'll go to the panel, but I'll leave you with one final thing just from my introduction, which is that this is a truly international polar year. It's not a European polar year, it's not a North American polar year, it's not a Russian polar year. It's an international polar year. Every country in the world will have the opportunity to get involved. We want to hear from the global south as much as the global north. It is an international polar year, and we want everyone to be able to take their part. So with that, we'll turn to our panel. And it's a great pleasure to be joined by all of you. Amanda, we'll start with you. Amanda, you're chair of the research board for the World Meteorological Organization. WMO was a key partner in IPY4, and now will be in this one too. And thank you for all of WMO's support as we've been planning. What do you see as the major contributions and leadership from WMO in this coming year?
Thanks very much, Henry. So the World Meteorological Organization is very proud to be part of the International Polar Year once again. The precursor organisation to the WMO was the International Meteorological Organisation, which was established in the late 1800s. And it proposed and promoted the second IPY, which happened in the early 1930s. And that was proposed by a conference in Copenhagen of meteorological service directors. And the focus of that International Polar Year was to improve polar weather observations in order to make safety at sea and in the air much improved. There were 27 observing stations just in the Arctic and many in the Antarctic during that session, and it established the first world data centre. However, the Second World War caused the loss of almost all of the data that was collected during that second International Polar Year. And so because of that, during the third International Polar Year, which occurred in the 1950s, there was a real focus on making sure that the legacy of these efforts would not be at risk from global conflict. And that has been a huge motivator for the World Meteorological Organization ever since. And so with the third International Polar Year, in partnership with the International Council of Science, the WMO created the World Data Centre system. And so now we have a global system of data centres where all of our observations are collected and maintained with a lot of redundancy to ensure that everything that we do is maintained for future generations. And as you can imagine, this is really key for understanding climate and climate change, but indeed everything that we understand about the global system is maintained in these centres. So the WMO has been engaged in the International Polar Years for more than a century. But now we have a truly international system as the UN has grown, as the World Meteorological Organization has established systems. And so now these efforts support very strongly the principle of knowledge to action. And that's certainly our core business for the WMO. And the International Polar Year itself is becoming part of our core business, and we're writing it into our strategic plan. So in terms of the planning process, the World Meteorological Organization has, of course, been involved in that very basic layer, the data standardization, management and sharing, which is really, you know, the foundation of what our organisation does. But we're also becoming deeply involved in efforts such as innovative network design for areas where data is sparse and hard to share, hard to communicate. And so we're trying to think about innovative ways, including AI, to improve the way we plan our expeditions, plan our observing experiments. And we're also thinking about services. The WMO exists to deliver forecasts and warnings, certainly, but also climate services to support planning, adaptation, resilience of communities everywhere in the world. And so we're thinking about how to incorporate International Polar Year science into developing better services. From the standpoint of research, I'm chair of the research board at the World Meteorological Organization, and we oversee and advise the research programs, the World Climate Research Program, the World Weather Research Program, and Global Atmosphere Watch, the Global Greenhouse Gas Watch. And so we're assisting in priority setting for the International Polar Year. But a big thing that we bring to the table is global collaboration. We have 193 members, and everything that we do has to serve all of those members. So we're committed to co-production of knowledge, capacity building across all of our members, supporting the next generation of scientists and service delivery professionals that make all of our lives safer and more productive. So from the standpoint of outcome, we're really thinking about sustained insights that form the basis of weather and climate services in this context of rapid change in the Earth systems in order to save lives and support resilience. And WMO leadership in that space lies in connecting countries, connecting peoples, and connecting disciplines so that we can support that ethos of knowledge and understanding and data to services and to develop research that society depends on. And so together, we're hoping to ensure a legacy of the International Polar Year, and that legacy is truly global. Thank you, Henry.
Amanda, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We'll go on to our next panelist now, Salvatore Aricò, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the International Science Council. International Science Council has been just as involved in International Polar Years as WMO and others. But given the tensions that we see across the globe, including in science, do you see a specific role for the International Science Council in enabling all countries, all scientists, all knowledge holders to participate as effectively as possible?
Thank you, Henry, and good morning, everyone. So let me take a step back, if I may. You mentioned in your introduction the need for the International Polar Year, the 5th IPY, to be inclusive. So I'd like to suggest that at the very beginning, that notion of inclusiveness has to reflect inclusiveness of disciplines, cross-fertilization among disciplines, co-design of the very research questions that the IPY will tackle together with the stakeholders other than scientists, and a very close partnership on an equal footing with the knowledge, the holders of the indigenous knowledge. Now, for the IPY to make a difference, I think it has to be a different animal, so to speak, than, for example, the 3rd International Polar Year and the 4th International Polar Year. The 3rd International Polar Year, 57, 58, was very much about knowledge. There was a lot that we didn't know. The 4th one, as Amanda mentioned, and also the 3rd one, was about reconstructing the knowledge, not just sort of compiling further the knowledge base, but also compensating the fact that we had lost a lot of data during the World War II. So I think 70 years later, from the 3rd International Polar Year, how can this International Polar Year make a difference? One aspect which I'd like to stress is that the knowledge that we generate has to be actionable, and that was also mentioned by Amanda, which is to say that we need to pivot a little bit to the science model behind the IPY and make sure that we really make a difference when it comes to knowledge that can contribute, generating knowledge for the IPY to generate knowledge that can contribute to solutions. Now that may sound as a bit of a threat to blue sky kind of research, not at all. The intention is to produce knowledge that can help solve multiple problems affecting the Arctic and the Antarctic and the whole world in terms of how that knowledge can really help solve problems, but also diffuse tensions, geopolitical tensions. So in that context, and I'm now answering Henry's question more directly, we are operating in a different context than the third international polar year, which was a bipolar context and which produced results which led to fantastic political and diplomatic results, the Antarctic Treaty System, etc. I think it would be difficult to think that nowadays, with this fifth international polar year, we can reach similar successes, which were possible back then, and I would say until the mid-80s with the Montreal Protocol on ozone depletion. Nowadays, we live in a world which is much, much more fragmented. And in that context, I think the International Polar Year, in addition to being an important knowledge generation exercise, is also a fantastic tool for science diplomacy. So this is one of the reasons why we are here, the co-conveners, so the IPY and the multiple science organizations that participate in it, because there is a realization of an increasing the increasing responsibility of scientists in society, and that also applies to the International Polar Year, the fifth one. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Salvatore. We'll go on to our third panelist, Herb Nakimayak, who is the Vice Chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council and Chair of ICC Canada. ICC has been a key partner of ours in the last few years as we developed together the International Polar Year, and I think IPY4 made some strides forward in terms of indigenous leadership and engagement. But what do you see as the potential of this IPY for promoting and sharing successes with indigenous leadership and equitable involvement?
Thank you, Henry. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to kind of give a shout out to the youth first before I start here. It's nice to have them in forums like this as we start to plan big events such as IPY. It's also important to recognize that Inuit and other Arctic Indigenous peoples already engage in leadership spaces within our homelands. The IPY could allow for interconnection, collaboration, and co-development between researchers, institutions, and Indigenous peoples organizations, building upon the work that we at ICC already do in Arctic research. Across many international foreign engagements, from the United Nations to the International Maritime Organization, at the Arctic Council, and at the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, our data has been useful in ensuring that we're making sound recommendations through years and years of research. Some of our programs run over 50 years of data, and for us, we find that that's a useful platform to build upon, so that looking at what the programs that we do in our national regions, could reflect what happens in the Central Arctic Ocean in international waters. So we find that making decisions, it's not a race to find what's there, but I think it should be a collaborative approach to find what's there and how best we can ensure that we sustain these regions. Salvatore mentioned the co-production of knowledge. For us, Indigenous knowledge, we utilize our knowledge systems to inform arenas in where planning, such as IPY, and also our engagement can not only be in spaces that predetermine what is relevant to Inuit And our knowledge holders must also have the right to choose when and where to be involved in Arctic research. As a matter of fact, we started 2 years ago now, we started monitoring, we monitor marine spaces in the summertime, but we've started monitoring these spaces also in the winter so that we can get a full glimpse of it. And sometimes research comes in for 2 or 3 or 4 month period, and that's the baseline, and we want to get a full year's glimpse, a picture of this to ensure that we're actually making sure that every part of that puzzle is put in place before any decisions are made, and we find that to be effective. As part of ICC's initiative under the previous international, sorry, I have a cold here, International Polar Year in 2007, 2008, our organization pushed to empower Inuit and engage with Arctic research through community-based research, promoting indigenous knowledge, and pursuing capacity-building initiatives. Much has been achieved in the last 17 years, but work remains to ensure that research in our regions is truly collaborative and co-developed. I mentioned indigenous knowledge and a co-production of knowledge. This means that Inuit are involved from the inception of research through its completion and dissemination. Data sovereignty we speak about, we want to ensure that our data is being used for relevant decisions and not regurgitated to look at to be broken down as something else. And I think Inuit have been doing a really good job all across the ICC to ensure that that data that's collected from the grassroots in the region out to the international stage, international forums, is exactly used for those decisions that are related to our priorities as Inuit, and as well as Indigenous peoples, to ensure that there's a matter of respect. So proper engagement, consultation. There's a great opportunity for this planning, which I have to say, Sarah Olsvik, our chair at ICC, is also part of the planning committee. And for that, it's a big win in ensuring that sound research and relevant research is done through the IPY leading up to. As a matter of fact, last week, when it comes to 2027, the German icebreaker, the Polar Stern, and the Canadian icebreaker, the Amundsen, presented to us as we develop our research priorities for 26, a plan to do some work in our waters in Canada. So for us, that is good consultation. It's never too much to consult early, and also it gives us a picture of what we can fit into our research schedule as we move to each season to ensure that our priorities are met. Building on our existing relationships across Inuit Nunat to deepen, expand, and create new working relationships is key for the upcoming International Polar Year. To accomplish this in Canada, government and research institutions need to start getting organized for the International Polar Year in a way that sets out clear governance structures. And this planning needs to fully include Inuit leadership. As I mentioned earlier, sound research, relevant research is key to ensure that we are in fact doing this for the right reasons. And at the end of the day, we are part of the environment, the ecosystem, and we want to ensure that the data that's being utilized for us and our priorities, we are in fact helping. We're looking at mercury, the levels of mercury in some of the beluga, and also the microplastics, which over the last few years have really alarmingly risen in our region. So we want to ensure that those health indicators, as we consume many species, at the end of the day, we're the end consumers of that. So we want to ensure that the health of the mammals and the environment, the ecosystem, is safe, and then as well, in turn, our health as well too. So it comes full circle when it comes to meaningful engagement. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Herb. Thank you. And we'll go to our fourth panelist, Gary Wilson, the president of the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research. Gary, I think you've probably come the furthest of almost anyone in the hall here. You've come to us from New Zealand. If anyone's come further, then good. Well done. Gary, we're here at an Arctic conference, but many of the past successes of the International Polar Year have been actually in Antarctica, and the International Polar Year is just as much Antarctic as it is Arctic. What do you see as the scientific priorities for Antarctic science?
Thanks, Henry, and good morning, everyone. Yes, kia ora tātou katoa, as we may say in the Māori language in New Zealand. I think the real picture here is it's global. There's no question, but we're sitting here with an audience who's very familiar with the Antarctic, or with the Arctic, but there is equally an audience that's familiar with the Antarctic. So I might touch on a few things that our panellists have mentioned, but with an Antarctic or Southern Hemisphere perspective, so that you might see how we view the importance of the polar year. So just firstly, a little bit of perspective on our view from the south on the importance of polar years. And Salvatore mentioned this, that IPY3, or the International Geophysical Year in 1957, led to the development of the Antarctic Treaty, and indeed the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, the organisation that I now look after. Both of these are still extremely present internationally. The treaty, of course, looking after governance and coordination of Antarctic activities, and then SCAR looking after the research and science and that coordination. So that certainly gives some perspective on how important the polar years are. And yes, IPY3 or IGY provided a major phase of discovery with respect to Antarctica, and kind of revealing for the first time the true scale of Antarctica's ice, the continent beneath it, and its relationship with the ocean. And then, as also mentioned, IPY4 in 2007, 50 years later, opened that up further. But in particular, as well as the more recent discoveries and the more engaged program with the general public and their interest in the poles, it helped us develop a polar career path. And that's really important for the researchers, but it's also really important for policy and indeed people. So that's just a bit of perspective from the south. In terms of a difference, for IPY5, we're definitely needing to address the issues of rapid change and the impact of a warming globe on the polar regions. And the Antarctic will have its place to play in the future of the planet. But again, as I said, while the Antarctic's clearly important in this, Antarctic researchers are part of a wider community that are tackling those issues and trying to help answer some of the key questions, not just about the potential impact of Antarctica on the rest of the globe, or the rest of the globe on Antarctica, whichever way you wish to discuss this topic, but also trying to help answer some key questions about what we might do, or some more granular understanding of the level to which we are potentially committing the planet and its people to change. And what we might need to do to close that gap between our understanding on the research side and the response on the policy side and the political side. So that's kind of my challenge in all of this, is how do we as scientists and researchers bridge that gap, or step into the gap between science on the one hand and people, policy and politics on the other hand. So, there's no question that that's a really important gap and a big focus for us. Perhaps also a focus on solutions, rather than tracking the change, perhaps stepping into that gap to think about, well, how do we engage more with people, policy and politics in terms of what the future might need to bring. But you did ask me about what we might look at, and so a few thoughts on where we might step into that gap. It's early days, but some ideas are starting to emerge, and indeed more will emerge. And while I might mention it from an Antarctic perspective, I think there's an Arctic perspective on the very same issues as well. So clearly one is understanding the carbon cycle in the Southern Hemisphere, and how the planet's natural systems, and particularly the ocean, might be part of the solution. So that's certainly something that's emerging out of this conversation. Another is understanding the connectivity between high latitudes and mid and low latitudes and the processes that connect them, particularly where bottlenecks might be either limiting the change, or if those bottlenecks are overcome, responding a bit more like a tipping point or generating runaway change. So that's another area that is emerging. And there's no question, as you listen to the conversations and the discussions around the challenge for the poles, that we need to be able to see through the variability in terms of the differences from point to point around the Antarctic. Parts of Antarctica are very different and responding in very different ways, but overall the continent-wide and hemispheric signals are not particularly good at the moment. And so thinking about actually how we might manage ecosystems in our response, given those different settings and the different responses. And I think I'll just finish with a point here that from the Antarctic perspective, I've heard it said, I think it was said yesterday in this room, that yes, the Arctic is for people and the Antarctic is for penguins. Well, that's not quite true. It's certainly true that we should be investigating how for the Antarctic we may learn from the indigenous views, where the relationship between Earth systems, ecosystems and human interactions are more directly considered. An extension of that, is that we might focus on research that helps us understand not only how we support restoration of natural, physical and ecosystems, but engaging with people and how those processes work for us and how we work for them and how we are indeed the stewards and the keepers. And it was really up to us. And we have some of those views in the Antarctic. We have indigenous peoples who look south and have that connectivity, and it will be important to engage with them. So I'll finish there. Thanks, Henry.
Great. Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you to all our panelists for kicking off this discussion. Our timer is ticking away. I've got lots of questions, but if the International Polio is about anything, it is about consultation and engagement and hearing from you. So if we could have the lights up in the auditorium, and very happy to take questions about people or penguins here on the main stage. You have the 4 people that you've heard from, and you have me from the International Arctic Science Committee. So these are just 5 of the more than 35 organizations who are involved in the planning here. So yeah, we've got a question 3 or 4 rows back more. Yeah, thank you. If you could just say who you are and then just your quick question. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm Rocky Whites. I'm director of the Maritime Studies program at Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Great discussion. Thank you all. As you know, or you may know, the Antarctic Treaty was the first nuclear non-proliferation treaty by prohibiting nuclear weapon testing in Antarctica. Could we at least, do you think, agree to extend that portion of the Antarctic Treaty on the quick to make sure nothing bad happens? Thank you.
So we're starting off with the easy questions about nuclear proliferation. I thought we were going to get a penguin question. Would anyone like to offer a view on?
Or for the penguins.
Salvatore, did you?
Yes, yeah, I'd like to respond in the first place indirectly. Recently, the International Science Council, which is the organization I belong to, has been called upon to elucidate scientific aspects related to the Convention on Biological Weapons and how that convention can rely on a scientific advisory board, etc., etc. So I think, by, let's say, analogy, yes, there are examples of situations which can and are very difficult geopolitically that science can help, bring knowledge, relevant knowledge to policy making for policymakers for them to consider.
Thank you, Salvatore. Gary, do you have a?
Yes, we're talking about the Antarctic, so I'll chip in. So the treaty itself doesn't have an end date on that, so that's perhaps not quite the concern. But the concern for me more is, if that is the question that people are concerned about, what can we do on the research side to help bridge the gap and engage with those interests to make sure we don't continue to travel in parallel? If indeed some of the issues and what they may represent and what a future might look like, or future scenarios might look like, similar to how we consider the climate change scenarios, I think maybe that's a way that we should pick up that question and look at it.
It's definitely the case that science works best in a peaceful environment. We're going to need diplomats to work very hard for the International Polar Year to mean that we can do the best science for both poles. Okay, do we have any other questions here? Yes, in grey, I think, with a, yep, thank you very much.
Hi, thank you so much. Anna Sauer from the University of Ottawa in McGill. I have a money question. For research in Antarctica and the Arctic is exceptionally expensive, and unfortunately we've had a bit of a withdrawal of funding from our southern neighbor here in Canada. And so I'm wondering, how do your organizations plan on supporting researchers, especially starting researchers and entering this very, very expensive field of research now that funding is getting scarce? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good question. IPY4, one of the great results of IPY4 was the creation of APEX, the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists, and APEX have a huge role in the planning of this next IPY. So we're hearing from APEX a lot about the importance of early career and getting people started in their careers. Amanda, would you like to offer a view?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we've been thinking about more broadly, not just in terms of the International Polar Year, but in terms of all of our research programs that we're looking after, and I'm sure we're all thinking in those terms. And it really is about diversifying sources. And in order to do that, it means stepping into the gap between science and policy, between science and action, protecting lives, building resilience. We have to make that case more strongly than ever so that all of our, potential funding agencies, foundations, civil society can understand that the world we live in is underpinned by the rigorous connected science that we do. And the better we make that case, and that we're not afraid to communicate the impact of our work on decisions and on policy and on human lives, I think the stronger we will be in terms of moving forward with continuing our science and as you say, supporting our junior researchers.
Okay, thank you. Salvatore?
Sorry to come in again, but so within the membership of the International Science Council, we have academies of sciences, disciplinary unions, but also funders. And some of them are rather big funders, and I think they are buying into this idea of a truly multi- and transdisciplinary program on polar science endeavor. Where we may face some difficulty is to try and persuade those consortia of big funders, so the Belmont Forum, the Global Research Council, that the way in which research funding is allocated has to evolve. Because yes, it is important that research be discipline-based, because that's the way that you go more in depth when it comes to understanding processes, etc. But you also have to put the puzzle, the pieces of the puzzle together. And it is proving, at least in the experience of the IASC, a bit difficult to have a constructive dialogue with consortia of research funding organizations to make them understand that the complexity of some of the problems that we are studying and that also applies to IPY5, requires a different approach when it comes to allocating funding for research. But the dialogue is going on. It is quite constructive. So we hope that there will be a change in the culture in which research funding is allocated. Thank you.
But perhaps I'll just add two things before we come to some more questions from the floor. Part of the International Polar Year, a big part of it, will be about sharing facilities, sharing infrastructure, doing more together and more cheaply than we can do separately, being more efficient in what we do. So that's a big part of this. And then the other thing, particularly on the Arctic side, is that we are bringing together lots of the countries and the funders who fund Arctic science and the Arctic Science Funders Forum to think about how we can work together in the future, bilaterally or multilaterally, to make a real impact with the money that we do have. Okay, do we have any other questions from the floor? Yes, here, thank you.
Good morning, Pierre Bilodeau from ArcticNet in Canada. I have a suggestion, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on potential topics for IPY5. We've heard a little bit about some polarization, whether it is people and penguins or whether it is basic and applied research. But in our case, in Arctic research, for sure, you've also talked about the indigenous knowledge science that they have, and we often call the other, which is the Western science. So there is a polarization or dichotomy, and I think it's hurting us on the ground to try to build the case that we need to work together. So is there a dialogue that we need to have as part of IPY to try to facilitate the integration of the, I mean, there's only one science globally. So how can we facilitate that conversation on the one science, bringing different aspects of it instead of talking about indigenous knowledge and Western science? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Herb, would you like to offer a view there?
Yep, sure. Thank you for that question. When it comes to planning, we look at science as, of course, it's very important, health, ecosystem. A lot of our knowledge systems in the work that we do are basically a way of life, and we apply those knowledge systems along integrating with science. So a question coming from ArcticNet, a good way to ensure that there's positive collaboration and inclusion. Everybody has a different point of view, and I'm sure that with yours, I'm thankful for that. We utilize our knowledge systems to ensure that relevant research happens in our region to each of the geographical regions in the circumpolar world, not just one as a whole. As you mentioned, there's one science good. That's one lens. That's sometimes, I would say, take off your blinders and look. There's a peripheral vision to see that there's different knowledge systems across the world that we need to all respect when we plan science work in each of those regions. Working with indigenous peoples will ensure that the research, as we spoke about funding earlier, if there's a lack of funding, then you make the most of the money with the funds that you have, and not just having a predetermined outcome what you're going to say next year, but finding out the facts, ensuring that you're at the right place at the right time with the right people. Having the right people at the table is important, and we need to ensure that we bring that as we plan for IPY. And I think with the geopolitical state in this world, it's more so important to ensure that we are doing, proper consultation, inclusion, and looking at these knowledge systems that could really benefit humanity, as we've been utilizing that to ensure that our way of life is protected, the species that we rely on are protected. Those are not just let's do it, but those are our way of life. We ensure that we monitor the species that we rely on. And if you look at that, then wow, that's really caring for the environment for that species, and then what falls from it, you're looking at being stewards for the environment as a whole. So rather than just science, you need to open up and sort of, like I said, inclusion is very important, planning is important, and the outcomes are important too. We want to ensure that the data that's collected is utilized so that we can make the best possible recommendations for policy and all of those things that matter to us in this world. So looking at both systems is really important, really key. And if you look at just one, then you're really looking at just one side of the picture. Thank you.
Yeah.
So one other thing I would just like to add to that perspective is understanding that the International Polar Year is not just 1 year. That this is a focusing event, but people are living their lives, and there's the process going into IPY, but it's about building a legacy for ongoing thriving on this planet for the future. And so I think that it's helpful if we don't think of this as just a year. It's a way of focusing our minds on these important questions.
Thanks both. That's a very good point about this not just being a couple of years of the International Polar Year. So do pick up one of these leaflets from our IPY stand outside. But in there you'll find a timeline. And IPY is very much a ramp-up process. So there are things that will be starting in the next few years that will be counted towards the International Polar Year. There are big programs and projects that are starting very soon that will be part of the International Polar Year. We'll look to see a peak of activity in 2032, 33, but then a legacy beyond. So there's a major opportunity to get involved, but right from now, not waiting until 32, 33. They're adding a few more minutes to our time, so that means we have more time for questions. I do want to look at the back in case there's anyone there, but we'll go at the front here. Thank you very much. But I couldn't see anyone at the back, so we'll have the front. Thank you. So a microphone here, if you could put your hand up again so they can see. Thank you.
My name is Skavak Sivalukti. I'm from Anchorage, Alaska, and I'm an Arctic Youth Ambassador. And my question is specifically for Dr. Lynch. You mentioned the utilization of AI to assist in climate research. How should the field contend using AI with what we presently know it is a resource-intensive tool that's contributing to the issues of climate change? How should we use it while trying to conduct research to kind of mitigate the impacts of climate change? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that's a really important question. And I think that, you know, this is the point at which I have to be a little bit geeky about this, that a lot of what we think of as AI and the way AI is used and thought about, we're thinking about large language models, which are these tremendously resource-intensive systems, which are also quite invasive of our data systems and our knowledge systems in ways that we can't always control. And that's kind of one type of AI that we think about. But the AI that we use in meteorology and climate spaces is a different beast entirely, and it's actually something that's been built up over the last certainly at least 20-25 years. It's been growing. There's certainly been an acceleration in the last year, but it is manifest in very different ways. It doesn't, while it learns from data, it doesn't scrape or harvest data. It is actually more resource efficient than our normal technology, rather than less resource efficient, as we see with large language models. And so we see in the space that I operate in, AI is presenting itself as not entirely without problems, but it's a tremendous opportunity, particularly for the Global South, to revolutionise their access to early warnings and to the capacity to save lives from reducing our exposure to weather hazards and also, you know, climate extremes. And so AI in the climate space is actually a very different thing from AI in the kind of public sphere. And I think that it's if I do anything at all, it's to kind of bring that idea to the surface, and that it is not just one thing. But I'm really appreciate you bringing it up, because the issue of data centres is something that, as climate scientists, we really have to consider that impact.
Thank you very much. Let's take one or two last questions. Yes, thank you. Yeah, keep your hand up so they can see you. Thank you. Great, thank you.
Hi, yeah, Ann Pendleton-Julian. I'm an architect, and I'm also the head of a think tank that works on entangled problems and action for them. My question is this: would it be too much, given that we're talking several years out still, to extend, this works off the last two questions, to extend this notion of intelligence, not just the dualism between indigenous and Western, I think it was called, science, but to look at the intelligence. There is a movement that's looking at different kinds of intelligence, especially among more than human species. And part of this movement has been facilitated by looking at AI not just as the tool, but as something that is seeming to develop intelligence in a computational way, which is different than our intelligence. But animal intelligences, and certainly indigenous epistemologies, accept the intelligence of whales. That's an easy one. But we're looking at mycelium and the way information exchange works with bacteria. So I'm wondering, especially since it's 3 or 4 years out, can this be extended to think about alternate intelligences as part of the science or contributing to the science?
Thank you for your question. We're almost out of time, but would anyone like to offer a view on that? It's a whole new world to me, and it sounds absolutely fascinating, but Herb?
Thank you for that. I can answer just a small portion of it. So now, because we do monitor the marine environment, the terrestrial environment, and our knowledge systems when it comes to reports and working together, we're utilizing AI now to ensure that AI is, when we utilize AI and the work that we do, that is actually correct. And we're correcting it ourselves as knowledge holders, working with scientists to ensure that data collected there is actually true to that data, when it comes to the end user. But alternate, I don't have an answer for that. I think that'd be a question for who's doing the work and planning each of those projects, whether they want those alternate systems or intelligence systems. For us, we're working with AI to make sure it's correct to our knowledge system, so I cannot speak to that.
Okay. Thank you again for your question. Come find us afterwards and we'll continue the discussion. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to you for your questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to each of your questions, but come find us afterwards or come to our stand or come to the session this afternoon. I'll leave you with a final few words. If you think the ability of science and knowledge to speak truth to power is important, then the International Polar Year should be important to you. If you think that indigenous leadership, equitable involvement, if you think that revitalized and new international science cooperation are all important, then the International Polar Year is for you. If you think there are exciting, large-scale initiatives that we should be doing in the Antarctic or the Arctic, then the International Polar Year is for you. And if you think there's a positive difference that we can make to the people that live and work in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and there are global connections to make between both poles and the rest of the world, then the International Polar Year is for you. And it's particularly for you if you think that science and knowledge are for people and for real-world solutions. The International Polar Year is for you. So please come and join us. We're at the start of this process, but it's going to be really exciting. We'll speak to you again from this stage, but more importantly, we want you to be involved in the whole process. So please do get involved. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to the panel. Thank you.